He walked into the dealership with nothing but hope, savings, and a dream, ready to buy his first car. But before he could even speak, the stares told him everything. The glances, the whispers, the way the manager's smile vanished the moment he saw his face. Minutes later, he wasn't a customer anymore, just another boy they didn't trust to belong there. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just left. Quietly, with the same calm they mistook for weakness. But the next morning, when a Rolls-Royce pulled up to those same glass doors, they learned just how wrong they were. He thought that moment was over, but it was only the beginning. Omari Thorne had planned this day for weeks. 18 years old, fresh out of high school and already accepted into Georgia Tech's engineering program, his future was finally starting to take shape. He wasn't flashy, never had been, just focused, driven. He'd saved for months from tutoring, summer jobs, and fixing neighbors' computers, all to buy something simple, a car he could trust for the long drives ahead. That Thursday morning felt like a clean page. The air was thick with the scent of rain, the kind that makes the pavement glisten. Omari left home early, folder in hand, every detail organized. Listings printed, financing prepared, routes mapped. His mother, Dr. Ayanna Thorne, was already on a conference call upstairs, her calm voice floating through the halls like a metronome of discipline. Omari didn't tell her his plan. He didn't need to. This was his moment, his independence. The dealership wasn't far, a small place off the highway with banners promising honesty, value, and trust. He rehearsed his questions in his head, checked his clothes one last time, and smiled at himself in the rear-view mirror. It wasn't pride. It was readiness. But sometimes, preparation means nothing to the world you're stepping into. Sometimes, the door that opens is an opportunity. It's a test you never signed up for. He thought he was just going to buy a car. He had no idea he was about to be reminded who the world still thinks he is. When Omari stepped into Crestview Motors, he felt that subtle shift, the kind that happens when a space suddenly forgets how to welcome you. The air-conditioned chill hit his skin, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. Behind the front desk, a woman barely looked up, her smile tightening when she saw him. He greeted her politely, folder in hand, explaining the listings he printed out. But her eyes flicked to his shoes, his hoodie, his skin, and something invisible yet unmistakable settled between them. A quiet, familiar barrier. She nodded toward the lot, promising someone would assist him soon. No one did. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The glass door reflected his own waiting face back at him. Outside, the cars gleamed like trophies behind invisible ropes, each one a prize he wasn't meant to touch. When the salesman finally appeared, clipboard in hand and a rehearsed politeness in his tone, Omari straightened his shoulders, steady, ready. But before he could speak, the man's question cut him in half. "You lost, son?" The words landed like a verdict, not an inquiry. Omari held out his folder, showing the printed models, VIN numbers, and financing notes. The man didn't even glance down. "We had problems lately," he muttered, his tone soft but sharp. "Folks coming by, taking photos, wasting time." Omari blinked, confusion flickering to disbelief. He explained again that he wasn't wasting time, that he was ready to buy. But the man's smirk told a different story, one that had been written long before Omari even walked in. "Why don't you come back with a parent?" he suggested. "Someone who can talk financing." It was the kind of sentence that sounded polite, but carried poison beneath it. Omari's heart pounded, heat rising in his chest, yet he stayed calm. His mother had raised him that way, to stay composed even when the world tried to make him break. "I'm paying cash," he said quietly. "My name's on the account." But the salesman's body language was already dismissing him, already walking away. "We're busy today," he tossed over his shoulder. "Maybe check one of the lots down the road. Something more in your range." And there it was, the line. Not shouted, not cruel, but heavy enough to crush the small flame of hope Omari had carried with him. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded, not in agreement but in exhaustion. He turned away, the folder still in his hand, its papers now creased and damp from the sweat of holding on too long. Outside, the Civic he wanted gleamed beneath the gray sky, clean and unreachable. Each step back to his old car felt heavier than the last, like he was walking through something thick and unseen, disappointment, anger, humiliation, all pressing down at once. When he drove off the lot, the world outside blurred behind the rain that began to fall. He took the long way home, not ready to face the questions in his mother's eyes. The windshield wipers moved in steady rhythm, a metronome to the thoughts he couldn't quiet. He'd done everything right, worked hard, stayed respectful, prepared, and still it hadn't been enough. Back home, the quiet walls of the house offered no comfort. His mother's voice drifted faintly from upstairs, calm and powerful, commanding respect in rooms full of people who saw her value instantly. Omari sat on the couch, the folder on his lap, staring at it as if the paper itself could explain what went wrong. When Ayanna came downstairs later, her eyes sharp yet soft, she noticed the way he wouldn't meet her gaze. He told her what happened, not with outrage, but with a weary calm that scared her more than anger ever could. She listened. She didn't interrupt. But behind her stillness, something ancient stirred. She'd spent years building her name, her company, her place in rooms where people doubted she belonged. And now, the same wound had reached her son. That night, as Omari scrolled through listings again, trying to pretend the day hadn't changed him, Ayanna sat alone in her office. Her fingers moved over her keyboard, not in panic, but with purpose. A few quiet calls, a few pointed questions. By dawn, her plan was already in motion. She wasn't going to argue with the world. She was going to remind it who they were and who it had underestimated. What Omari didn't know was that by the next morning, his mother wouldn't just be driving to that dealership. She'd be driving straight through their assumptions. He thought the storm had passed, but it was only gathering strength. The next morning broke with the kind of silence that feels like a warning. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, the clouds low and heavy, and from the second garage door opened, the world seemed to tilt. The purr of the Rolls-Royce filled the air, not loud but commanding. Dr. Ayanna Thorne rarely drove it, but today wasn't about comfort, it was about clarity. As she pulled into Crestview Motors, heads turned. The car didn't just gleam, it announced itself, every curve and reflection cutting to the morning light, like truth made visible. The receptionist froze mid-sentence, eyes flicking from the car to the woman stepping out. Composed, elegant, untouchable. No words of greeting came, only a stunned silence as Ayanna walked past, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Every sound in the lobby seemed to vanish under that rhythm. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence did it for her. When the general manager appeared, already trying to mask the unease in his expression, she stopped him with a glance. There was no shouting, no spectacle, just precision. Her voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the air as she placed Omari's blue folder on the counter. Every word she spoke carried weight, describing what happened to her son, not as a plea for apology, but as a record of fact. The room changed temperature. The manager's confident stance began to waver. His smile faltered. For the first time, he looked small inside his own dealership. Ayanna didn't accuse. She educated. Her sentences landed like soft strikes, each one more powerful for its restraint. You didn't know who he was, she said, but that's not the problem. The problem is you thought it mattered. The receptionist had stopped typing entirely. The salesman who dismissed Omari stood by the door, his face pale, every memory of yesterday replaying in excruciating detail. Ayanna reached into her bag and laid a single black business card on the desk, matte, embossed, simple. Dr. Ayanna Thorne. It read, beneath the word CO, Ortec Biolabs. In that moment, the dealership's polished walls reflected something far less pretty, an image of themselves stripped bare. She didn't have to explain who she was. The silence did it for her. The manager tried to recover, to offer a second chance, but Ayanna simply smiled, cold and steady. My son doesn't need your permission to belong, she said quietly. Then she turned, walking toward the door without another word, leaving the weight of her truth behind her like an aftershock. Outside, the Rolls-Royce waited, gleaming under gray light, more symbol than car, a reminder of the cost of assumptions. Inside, no one spoke. The salesman who had dismissed Omari finally exhaled, realizing too late that the boy he'd underestimated had never needed to prove himself at all. He'd only needed to be seen. As the car pulled away, its reflection lingered in the dealership's glass walls like a mirror they couldn't escape, forcing everyone inside to look at what they'd become. For Ayanna, it wasn't victory. It was validation of a lesson she'd learned long ago. Silence doesn't protect, it permits. For Omari, still unaware of the scene unfolding miles away, something was quietly shifting. Justice, not in noise, but in presence. The kind that doesn't shout. It just arrives, uninvited, undeniable. But the story didn't end with that drive. What came next would leave a mark none of them could forget. When Ayanna returned home later that day, the house was quiet again. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the hallway clock filled the air. Omari was in the living room, laptop still open, scrolling through car listings he no longer wanted to see. When she walked in, he looked up, his expression calm but dimmed, as if a small light inside him had burned out without anyone noticing. She didn't tell him what she'd done. She didn't mention the Rolls-Royce or the silence she'd left behind at Crestview Motors. She just asked if he wanted dinner. Because sometimes the best way to protect your child isn't through explanation, it's through restoration. In the days that followed, Omari went about his routine as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted. He noticed it in the way strangers looked at him, in how he second-guessed simple things like where to stand or how to speak. The world had shown him, once again, how fragile dignity could feel when it's filtered through someone else's perception. Yet there was also a new strength in him, something quiet but unbreakable, the kind that grows in the space between injustice and self-worth. And in another part of town, that dealership changed too. A policy was rewritten. Diversity training that had been postponed for months was suddenly prioritized. The general manager started watching customers differently, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Change didn't happen overnight, but something had begun. That's what Ayanna wanted. Not revenge, but recognition. Not to humiliate them, but to remind them of what they've forgotten. Respect doesn't come from wealth. It comes from humanity. For her, it wasn't about her title or the luxury of her car. It was about every mother who'd had to teach her son how to stay calm when the world refused to see his innocence. It was about the millions of quiet humiliations that never make headlines but carve deep scars all the same. Omari's story wasn't unique, and that's what made it heartbreaking. Because every day, someone else walks into a space with hope in their hands and walks out carrying the weight of someone's prejudice. Every day, someone's value is measured not by effort or intention, but by skin. And yet, stories like Omari's remind us that grace doesn't mean silence. It means strength with purpose. He didn't have to shout to prove his worth. His mother didn't have to threaten to be heard. They simply showed up, and that was enough to expose the truth. Maybe that's where change really begins. Not in grand gestures, but in moments when someone decides not to let ignorance go unchallenged. When someone refuses to let dignity be optional. So the next time you see someone being underestimated, dismissed, or disrespected, remember, how you respond defines more than just your character. It defines the kind of world we all have to live in. Because Omari's story isn't about a dealership. It's about a mirror. And the question is, when it's held up to us, what do we see staring back?